Hi, this is Elizabeth from Felted Sky Studio, here with the instructions for our Desert Trail Needle Felting Kit. So before we get started, it would be good if you make sure that you have these things on hand. We need a foam mat for needle felting. So this is the one that we carry, but any foam mat will do if it's big enough for your picture to lay flat, and if it is dense enough foam. We don't want the needle to be able to poke out the other side, so we just need it to be dense enough and thick enough. You might also want to have on hand a frame to use to frame your picture in the end. And it's nice to have that before you start because you can trim your pre-felt backing to fit the frame that you're going to use. So if you don't have that beforehand, sometimes you just have to cut your picture down a little much to fit it in the frame. So again, this is the one that we carry, but other frames will also work. And then you might want to have a sharp scissors ready. We're going to need to trim at the end some of the wool off from the edges. Alright, so let's open up the kit. I'll just pull everything out. Alright, so let's talk about the wool that is in this kit. So this is called a felting bat, or carded bat, or just batting. So this is the wool that we carry at Felted Sky Studio. It's actually our custom made felting bats. So we work with a farm in Kentucky that makes these for us just the way that we like them. So it's very clean wool, it's kind of springy, it's nice and soft. So we really like working with it, and hopefully you will too. And then we have our pre-felt backing. So this is kind of the canvas for the artwork. So this is called a pre-felt or a preliminary felt because it is not all the way felted. So this is carded wool that we put through a machine called a felt loom, which is a very large needle felting machine. And this is actually Kentucky wool from our friends at that farm that I was just talking about. So it's nice that it's local sheep's wool, or at least small farm sheep's wool, now that I live in Michigan. Alright, and then the needle is in this piece of foam board to protect it so that it doesn't get bent or broken, but also that protects you or any pets or children you have around. So the needles are very sharp at the bottom, and you can definitely bleed if you get a good poke and it hurts. So either keep it in the foam board for storage, or another place to put it is to slide it into the side of your mat just to keep it safe. So that's the needle. We have a 38 triangle for this kit. So the different sizes and gauges of needles, they all do slightly different things for needle felting, but this is a good all-around general purpose needle. Alright, so on the instruction sheet here we have the colors listed on the front that you can refer to, and then each step is numbered, but there are also extra numbers next to the steps, and that is a time stamp for the video. So that just lets you go backwards or forwards through the video, and you can fast forward or rewind just to the exact step you want to see. And if you want to see a step over again, you can use the time stamp to get there quickly. Alright, so I think now we're ready to begin. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is, of course, put your backing on the mat. And then we're going to put in the sky. So for the most part, we work from the top down to the bottom and kind of filling in layers as we go. So we're going to put in the sky, and this sky is actually a mixture of two colors. So the first one is this gray called Baby Elephant. So we don't need all of this. We're going to need some. I'm going to get our original back. We're going to need some of this gray for the path later. So we're going to tear off a piece just to use for the sky. So tear into your wool, and that will be what we'll use for our sky. So all we're going to do is just poke the needle into this wool down through to the mat. So just poking. That's really all it is for this part. This is fairly straightforward, so you're just going to poke all over this piece so it's well attached. You can see it's already starting to attach. And just keep an eye on your other hand. I like to kind of smooth out the wool and put a little pressure on it to keep it nice and flattened out while I'm poking it. But you can also not have your other hand around at all. So you just want to make sure you know where your needle is and your other fingers are, and try not to poke yourself while you're doing this. And it does inevitably happen at some point usually, but try and be very careful. Alright, so I'll speed up the video for this part because this is pretty straightforward, and you can just see how I'm going to flatten out the rest of this area just poking. Alright, here we go. Okay, now that's finished, and you can see it's nicely flattened out and attached. And we're not going to worry too much about needle holes right now, because when we pull it up off the mat, most of those will not be as noticeable. And we're also not going to worry about the edges, because at the very end we're going to just cut all that off with the scissors. So the next thing that we're going to do is put some blue over top of this. So let me show you in our original. We still want just a little bit of the gray to show through. It's kind of a bluey gray sky. So we're going to get our color called baby blue. We don't need all of this, so I'm going to tear off the extra. And then we want to open this up a little bit and make it thinner and a little more open here with the fibers so that the gray will show through. So we probably don't even need this amount. So I'm just going to tear off a little bit more from the bottom and then just kind of lay it out, kind of opening up the fibers so we're still going to get to see some of that gray. Alright, so we're going to have something like that, and then we're just going to poke this all the way down as well. And again, kind of thinning it out, a little bit of personal preference, how much gray you want to show through. Alright, so I will just speed up the video again on this part, and we'll just poke down into the mat again, all of this. So here we go. Alright, so there we have it. And this is a very kind of subtle, thing we have going on here with the colors blended. But I think it looks pretty cool, and it's just an example of how you can use two colors overlapping each other to make kind of a neat effect, even though it's very subtle. Okay, so the next thing we're going to put in is our rock formation back here in the distance. So we're doing that with our color called Spice Berry, and this is kind of just going to be a free form thing that we put in here, but be conscious of keeping it close enough to the top, so it's about a 1/2 inch from the top of the piece, and over here this is about another 1/2 inch on that side. So we want to make sure we get this in the right spot, because the rest kind of works from there as we put in the other mountains, and we don't want this to be covered up if it's not high enough on our piece of artwork. So the way that we're going to do this is just kind of find a spot, and we're going to tear in about the width that we want our rock formation to be. And this is not going to be exactly square, but that's the type of piece we want to start out with. Is perhaps about like this. So just kind of tinker around till you feel like you have the right shape. We're going to lay it on, again, fairly close to the top and fairly close to the side. And then the way that we're going to do the shaping is start with the point. So we don't want the top to be all the way flat. We want it to have kind of an organic look. So this point is where we're going to start with the shaping. So just poke into the wool at the point where you think that point will be. So just do a little bit of poking there, just right in one spot. And then we're going to take the needle and pull the wool. You can help with your fingers. Pull the wool down from that spot and poke that part. And then on the other side, again, we're going to pull the wool down again from that point, taking it with the needle and pulling down. So there we've gotten that point. And then we can pull the wool kind of back up to make the next part of the top shape. Something like that on this side, and then this is going to, I'm going to push some wool over so we have, the side is not completely straight up and down either. And then we'll continue on over here. We're going to pull a little bit of wool back up, poke. You see our shape is starting, and then we're going to go pull this back up there, and then it's just kind of tapers off then to the right, and then we go down. And this shape doesn't have to be exactly like mine. You can kind of do your own interpretation of a rock formation. So then we'll just continue poking until all of this is poked down. If you still see any sky through the wool, I actually have a little too much at the bottom, so if you have any parts that are too thin, you can pull off just little tiny pieces of wool to fill in and just poke down. And if you don't like your rock formation, it is quite possible to just pull it up entirely. So it's very hard to make mistakes that cannot be fixed in needle felting. So you could pull this whole thing off and try again, or you can tinker around with the shaping by taking little extra pieces and filling in here and there. And there should be enough extra of this color that you can do another one, and if you needed to pull the whole first one off, there should be extra wool for you to play around with. So again, we don't really need all of this. I'm going to pull a little more off just so it doesn't take as long to get the rest poked down. Okay, so we don't need to worry about the bottom very much. We're going to overlap with the mountains. None of that will be seen at the bottom. So now we're not going to put on like the highlighting and the detail work on this now. We're going to go back and do all of that later. So our next thing that we're going to do is get our dark gray called Slate and work on the mountains. So we're going to come across that rock formation, down, up, down, and back up. So again, we're just doing this free form, and they don't have to look exactly like the example. You do want to make sure that they are close to the top. So again, this is maybe about 3/4 of an inch here, maybe an inch here. So just don't make it too far down on the piece or we won't have room for everything else. So just make sure your mountains are well up towards the top. So this is a little bit too much wool, I'm thinking, so I'm just going to pull off some, and we have a little less while we're working the mountains, and if we need more we can always go back and get some of that we tore off. Alright, so we're going to start putting in the wool where we want it to go. So we're going to overlap here. So I'm going to hold with my fingers, and then using the needle I'm going to catch the top edge first, kind of angling in to catch that top edge, and then we can poke down a little bit more on the wool there to get it holding in place. Alright, so we were headed down and now we need to go up. So we're just doing this part until we get to wherever that dip was, and then we're going to go all the way up here, this direction. So again, hold and poke just this part, catching that edge, and figure out the best way for you to hold that, and then we'll poke a little more of this wool down just to get it in place. So again, this mountain peak is perhaps 3/4 of an inch down from the top of our wool painting. So go up to wherever you think that point will be, just to the point, and then we're going to pull again, heading down. So if it's not staying quite there at the point, do a little extra poking. And then we're going to pull down. So there's our first mountain peak in the distance. So I'm just going down this line to about there, and then we're going to go back up with our wool. So this is the higher peak that needs to be about 1/2 inch down from the top. So up to where that peak should go. And then back down. And again, we can go fill in. I see I have a little spot to fill in. When we're finished here, that doesn't have quite enough wool. Alright, so down to this dip and then back up. And again, most of this right side is going to be covered up, but we'll go ahead and put it in. So now we can go back and poke all of this down, and any little spots where the sky may be showing through, we'll just add little pieces, just add a little bit so that it's nice and solid. Don't want to see the sky poking through. Okay, so you'll see from the original, these shapes are not exact. They're always going to turn out a little bit different, but here I could even pull up a little bit and reshape if I want. If I think that I did not get it quite where I would like it to be. So as long as they are something like that, it does not have to look exactly like mine. And if you are unhappy with your mountains, again, you could pull the entire thing back off, and there should be enough of your gray wool to even do a second attempt at mountains. Or you can just tinker around with these to get the shaping. So I think I'll speed up the end here very quickly just so that we can get through this part. So we need to poke the rest of this all the way down. Alright, so there we have the mountains in. And again, we're not going to put on our little highlights and details quite yet. We're going to continue filling in the rest first with our basic shapes. So now we're going to do these two major rock formations on the sides, and then we'll fill in this area in the middle. Alright, so for this we need our color called Terracotta. So this orange color. And this we're going to put in kind of in parts. So we have kind of these rounded parts of our rocks. So for the first one, we're going to tear off and even fold over just a bit, and we're going to get in the shape of our the top of this rock formation. So this needs to come up, be very close to the top, again about a ½ inch down from the top of our picture. So here's what we're going to have, and you can kind of fold the edges under. So this first piece of wool is going to be like that. And then let's just go ahead and get the other pieces of wool that we're going to need. So then we have one that juts out a little bit. So we'll pull off another piece. It's nice to arrange them first and just kind of make sure you have them going how you would like them. So then we'll do this bottom piece. Actually, this one I think I perhaps overlapped too much. And we have a little more wool than we need here, so we can even take some of that and use for our last little one at the bottom. Alright, so those rock formations on that side are going to be from that wool, and then we can work on this one on the other side. So it's a little shorter, it's starting down farther. we're still going to see a little bit of this mountain here. So we'll tear a piece, kind of get it into the shape we want for this first part. So there. And then fill in the other parts. So we have one coming out just a little bit farther, and then a couple little pieces at the bottom. So a little more rounded, and then we'll have this one extra little ball piece at the end. So that's kind of just roughed in, so we have an idea of where we're headed and have all the right wool laid out. Alright, so then we're just going to kind of work on this the way that we did the mountains. So up at the top here, this one is going to be mostly straight across, so I'm just going to go in along that line at the top, kind of angling my needle downward. And then we're going to go along this edge, making it mostly straight, not quite straight down. And then our next piece, once we poke this just a little bit more, you see we have pretty much wool in here, so it's actually going to be slightly 3D and popped up off of the backing just a little bit. That kind of just adds to the nice effect that we have going on, making it just a little bit 3D looking. Alright, so then we have this next piece. So I'm just kind of working to pull it into place as I'm going. So this one's going to come out and curve downward. And again, you can kind of push the wool with your needle the direction you want it to go. So curving downward. And then this next piece kind of juts out a bit more. A bit of a curve here, and then this next little part too. And actually, I think we don't even need this little extra piece at the bottom. This is looking like enough. So again, just going for this rock formation shape. You can refer back to the picture on your front of your kit or on the instruction sheet. Alright, so there's the basic shape of our rock formation, and now we're just going to clean it up a little, and if there are any spots where you see some backing showing through, again, just tear extra little pieces off and fill in. So we want it to be nice and solid without any of that backing showing through. So again, now we can tinker with it a bit, pulling it where we want it to go. And filling in any little spots that are too thin. Alright, so I'll speed up the video now and just kind of show cleaning up this area, and then we'll be ready to do the other side. Alright, so there's our rock formation on that side, and again we're not going to put in our highlights yet. We're going to continue on just getting in our basic shapes. So on the other side, so hold in place where we want it to go, kind of tuck in so we have the basic shape already from the wool. And again, catching just the edge with the needle, and once the edge is poked, then start down on the rest of the wool. Next piece of wool kind of juts out a little bit further. Again, we don't have to poke down all the way flat. We want just a little bit of a 3D effect. So this can pop out a little bit from where the mountains were. We don't need to poke it down quite as much as we flattened out the mountains or the sky. If you see any little white fibers or little pieces of vegetable matter, we call them little pieces of dirt and straw from the sheep, just pick them out with the needle. I just saw one there that I picked out. Alright, so just a little more on this side, kind of a smaller rock area here at the bottom. And ending with just a little bit of more of a ball for this last rock shape at the bottom. And yours will not be exactly like mine. Mine is not even exactly like my original. So that is fine though. Each one turns out a little bit different. Okay, so there are basic rock formation shapes. And now we're on to these trees, this tree line here, and then this other vegetation. I think of this as kind of some dried out shrubs and bushes, maybe some dried out trees. So green first, and then we'll put in this lighter brown. So for the green tree line, you need this color called Ivy. So we don't need all of this. Again, we're going to pull off just a piece of it to do this area. And we're going to start these trees right over here. So kind of pick where they're going to begin, and then poke the end down right there next to our rock formation. Go along this edge like so. And then very similar to our mountains, we want these to go up and down looking like they are trees of different heights. So I just poked right through to here, and then I'm going to lift up and pull the wool up to a bit of a rounded point for our first tree area here. And this could even go up a little farther into that rock formation. And then we want to go back down. So see how we got that tree line shape there. And then we want to make another little rounded area. Back down. So again, we're just using the needle to pull the wool where we want it, and then poke down, and then continue on. Alright, so that little tree area, again, the one from my original is not exactly like this one, but this is close enough. And we could use just a little bit more green wool to fill in. So I'm just going to pull off some extra little pieces if we need. And then poke them in. So again, we probably need one more little bit to fill in this area. Just taking little pieces, fill in our tree line. And you could probably even do this individually if you're finding the technique difficult to get the shaping that you want. You could just pull off little parts and do these all as individual pieces also. And that would work as well. Alright, so once we've got our tree line in green, then we can do the other row of vegetation, kind of dried out stuff in the color called Caramel. So that is this one, and again, we don't need all of this. There's always a little bit of extra wool in the kits for you. And so this one we're going to lay in, so something like that. It's going to go all the way over to our other rock formation. So again, we want to make the top kind of bumpy on this one. So we're going to start, pick a side to start at, and get well attached right there next to the rock formation. So even even pushing the wool over if it's looking a little thin into place. So then I'm just going to figure out kind of the little bumps and valleys I want at the top, and just use the needle to push the wool where we want it to go. And here, as I was kind of pushing the wool to make sure I had it thick enough, kind of run out from our original piece. So just pull off some more and we'll go right overlapping. Or if you had left your original piece a little bigger, you might be able to finish with just one. Alright, so we want to go right up to our rock formation, but we don't want to overlap it at all. So just keep the wool right next to it and take the needle and get it right into those areas, but not overlapping our rock formation at all. Alright, so that is looking pretty good. And again, if we want it to be any thicker, if there are any thin spots, just pull off little pieces and add on. If you poke a little extra on the mountains right behind this, right down to it, you can get that 3D effect where the mountains look definitely like they're behind it, and this is popping up just a little off of the backing. Kind of that textured 3D effect. So it doesn't have to be all the way flattened out. In fact, we want it not to be entirely. Alright. And then I feel like I've lost maybe a little too much of my green trees, so if you want to do any tinkering and add a little bit more behind here, just be careful not to go over the brown we just put in, but you can go right up to it and add a little more green even. Let's go ahead and put in our path. So our path here in the gray baby elephant. So we're going to come over and then down. So that's what we're shooting for. So just kind of pull the baby elephant so you get a thin line, and we can poke as we go even. So we're going to put this right up to our rock formation. Like so. And we're going to come over here. So poke this down as you're going. And then we're going to, once that is all poked, this section, then we're going to turn the wool and head back over here, and we want it to be a little bit wider here where it ends than it was where we started. poke all of this down. And we can pull off the extra at the bottom. Make sure we've got it well poked down. This can be quite flat, so poke it very vigorously all the way into the mat. Okay, there's our little path in the desert. So now we'll take our peaches and cream color and we're just going to fill in the rest of the ground that we still see the backing. So we're just going to take pieces and kind of position them where we need them and tear off. And then for these other parts, tear smaller pieces and kind of pull the wool to fit into these little areas. Actually, I'm seeing that we need more of a straight line at the bottom of this tree line, so I'm going to go back and just fix this a little bit. A nice straight line there. There we go. Alright, so we're just going to pull pieces, small pieces off and fill in all of these areas. So I'll speed up the video here and that will help that go along a little bit faster. Okay, so there we are, all filled in with our peach color. And going back to our original, even though we have filled in everywhere, we can also take a little bit and just put it over onto the path, just to make it look like maybe the path is has some little sandy spots on it. So with your fibers still going kind of straight out into the path. And we could put 1 or 2 more of those. Just helps it look a little more realistic, not to have a perfect edge there. Alright, so that's pretty good. So now we're going to go back through and do all of our highlighting. So putting in all the little nice details that make it look finished. And then these little cacti will be put in at the very end. Alright, so going back and starting with our rock formation in the distance, it has some little lines of peach, or rather terracotta, not peach. So it has a few lines of terracotta and a few lines of our very darkest gray that I need to find. I call this one lava rock, so a few little thin lines of that. And then it also has a few little spots of this color called mocha. Alright, so to do these thin little lines, we're going to take our pieces of wool and just pull out a thin line. And then starting at the tip of the line at the top, poke in well, and then just you can hold down to the bottom, and then at some point you want to tear off. So here's one line going in on that, and then you could put a little thin line of mocha. And again, this is a bit at your discretion to do the highlights that you like. So these are just the ones that I have come up with, but they do not have to be exactly like this. I have another terracotta, giving some more interest in highlighting there. Then we could do a thin line of lava rock. That's the color, not necessarily the rock we're talking about here. And then you can get one more of these in, perhaps over here on our tallest point. And the thinner you pull the wool, the thinner your line will be. And just poke right down the line. I'll put in another terracotta over by that one. I want it to be a pretty thin line. And perhaps one more over here. And then we can put in a couple more highlights of mocha. So I'm actually going to do not as much of a line, but just a bit more of a rounded shape here to get some mocha on the bottom, and might have been a bit much. We want the spiceberry color, our original color, to show through. And then a little more mocha over here. Maybe a tiny bit more mocha at this side. It's not very much. These are very tiny pieces. just want it to be a little more interesting there in the background. And you can see it's not exactly like my original. The original actually looks a bit more messy. We can kind of fuzz these up and combine them, and it doesn't have to be perfect lines back there. This one maybe should extend up a bit, so I'm just taking my needle and just pulling this wool where I want it to go. That looks fairly good, so I think we will leave that as is. And then on our mountains, we want to use just a little bit of our lava rock to do some lines at the top of the mountains. So again, pretty thin, almost as thin as you can make them. So just have some lines up there to look like the grooved tops of the mountains. And you want them to be placed so they make the mountains look a little more realistic at the tops. Some nice details. And then do a couple lines on our other peak, starting near the tip, just coming down a little bit towards the other mountain. And then this next one coming down kind of this direction. And again, if you decide that you don't like where you have placed these, you can always just pull them back up and start again. And on these mountains we also have just a little bit of our darkest green, which we call Olive Grove. I'm going to place just a little piece right here. It's very subtle, you can even barely see it on the video, I'm thinking. Just a little piece on that side, and maybe a very tiny little bit on the other side, other mountain peak. Alright, and then we want to take our lava rock color again and just put a little bit of that on both of these sides of the mountain. So this will be a little bit bigger of a piece, something like that, and then pull off a piece for the other side, just making these sides a little bit darker. So we'll put that in. And I think I want to fill in just a little bit more of that right up next to our rock formation and our little brown trees. So there we have that on that side, and then the other side right down to our trees here. Alright, and once that is in, then we want to get our leftovers of Baby Elephant, our lightest gray, and put just a couple of light gray highlights over the mountains. So again, very wispy pieces. There's not much wool at all. So decide where you would like these little pieces. So that's where I'm going to put those on mine. So we have one here. So this was 4 pieces. 1, 2, 3, 4. Just very tiny pieces, and we want the colors underneath them to still be showing through. So on our tree line, we're going to put, again, just a little bit of lava rock here at the bottom, and then along the tops of the tree line we're going to put just a little bit of the color called Lagoon, so the blue-green color. So here's my line of lava rock here at the base of the green tree line. And again, we don't want it to be perfect. We can mess with it a bit. Something like that. And then our blue-green color called Lagoon, we're going to take a very thin, long, wispy piece and just put it over at the very top of this green tree line. So I'm going to actually try and keep my piece intact and just go along the very little tops of my trees. So pulling as I go to thin out the line. And poking it in kind of gently because I still want these green trees to be popping out a bit from their background, from the mountains. So at the end, either tear off or you can kind of fold it back on itself, this line. I'm going to gently go back over and make sure I've gotten it all the way attached. And it's just a little highlight on our trees. Alright, and now we can put in a few details on this section. We're going to put in a little bit of mocha, kind of the hints of branches or trunks in here, and then just little hints of our darkest green also. Okay, so first with mocha, I'm going to put a little line of mocha at the bottom. So starting poking at the tip, and then we'll just pull our line across. Doesn't need to go all of the way, probably about like that. So I'm just going to poke this in at the bottom. Then I'm going to add maybe a little more mocha up in this area. So again, just tiny pieces, for our little highlights, shadows. So for our little teeny tiny hints of the branches and perhaps some tree trunks back in here, we're going to make very, I'm not even sure how well you can see that, but very small little pieces, and sometimes it helps to roll them a little, helps them hold together before you put them on. So I'm tearing off very small little pieces for this, kind of randomly arranging them with the idea of little branches back in there, or little shrubs. Okay, so that is looking pretty good to me. Some of these might be still a little bit too wide, if anything. We want them to be very thin. Then we can get our darkest green and Olive Grove and just put a tiny bit of this green in here. And maybe a little down at this corner. Just hints of different plants and how they might look. And again, pull off if you don't like it. This one I think should be a little farther down at the corner of that. And then maybe a tiny little hint of green on the other side. So there we have it. Alright, moving right along, we need to put some highlights on our rock formations. So we're using the peach color, the lighter peaches and cream color for some lines in the rocks, and then also Spiceberry is the darker lines, and then a little bit of mocha at the bottoms. Alright, so first let's do our lines of peach. Again, pulling thin little lines of wool, and we're going to put a couple of these little thin lines at the top over here, so poke the very end, and then put just a little pressure over here so you pull the line over, and then I'm going to tear off the extra. And again, these can curve a bit. They don't have to be perfectly straight. We want them to look kind of natural and organic, like nature, not perfectly straight. And then we'll want more lines. Line here. So again, pulling it so that it reaches the end. Poke right on the line, and one more next to that. And then let's go to the other side and do thin line and peach here. And another line right here, very thin. And if you need to go back over it, just get a tiny bit more wool. Or if it's too thick, again, you can take these off and redo. And I'm going to put one more little highlight down on this rounded part at the bottom. So there are our peach lines. Now let's do Spiceberry, so our darker lines. So I have a little piece here. I'm going to put one darker line in this direction near the top. And then here. Giving our rock some character, shadows and highlights. that's it for that side, unless of course you want to add some more. So again, these are very much up to you if you want to have a slightly different interpretation. We have another one in this spot. Alright, and now let's add a few mocha lines. So the brown, I want a line of mocha at the bottom of this right side. This one can be a little bit thicker. And we want a little bit of mocha right in here. And on the other side, a little bit of mocha in this area. And at the very bottom, and we could also put just a little bit along the side of our path, kind of like a bit right here. And one more little line in the sand here. Okay, we are getting close. Now it is time to add our cactus and other little cacti. So with the very darkest green, I'm going to put in this cactus here. So we're going to tear off a piece about like this, and then roll it in between your hands, kind of like rolling a snake. This just helps to get the rounded shaping and kind of already start smoothing out the fibers. So, and we want a rounded top, so just fold the top over and pick which seems better for the bottom or the top. This might have been a bit too much, so I'm just going to roll a little bit more, and I want to get it to the right height that we would like. So it still seems slightly tall. So just kind of work with that till you get a nice cactus height. And then with this, again, we are going to poke in on the edges at an angle. So just kind of holding it in place, figure out where you would like this cactus to go, and then poke down at the angle just to get the edges started. Kind of tucking in the edges. Might need to flip around so I can do the other side. Alright, So there is the start of our cactus, and then we need to put on his other appendages. Alright, so for other limbs, we're going to just do one roll again, and so we're going to roll this until we feel like we have a nice right amount of wool, and then it will be positioned about like that. So kind of tack it down and think about where these need to go before you poke them all the way. So again, just very carefully and deliberately, we're just going to catch the edges kind of on the back side first and arrange our cactus. So again, you can move the mat around if you need to. It's hard for me to catch that other side without moving mine. So we're leaving the top more rounded, so we want to just catch the edges very well before we poke at all on our rounded top part that we can see. So once it's attached, then we can poke very gently, very gently on our top part. So we still want it to stay kind of nice and 3D and popped off of the backing. So don't go down into the mat when you're going over your rounded parts. There you can see it's still going to be off of the mat, kind of a 3D effect here. So there's our cacti. And again, if you need to do it again, you could pull the whole thing off and start over. There's plenty of wool. Alright, so for our little guys, do these green ones next. So that's actually with ivy, which looks fairly similar, but I like to do these just to have them be a little bit different. So this cactus over here just has two little appendages, whatever those are called. So we need to make just a very small roll or two and see how I'd like this one to go. So again, I'm just kind of catching these edges with the needle, tucking them in, but I'm not poking it all the way flat. I can give them another leaf out this way. So something like that, and then on the other side, this one has 3 or 4 little stems, leaves coming up. So just little pieces, and I find that rolling them helps me to shape them. So one over this direction. that's pretty good. So our very last thing to put in is our little blue-green shrubs. So this reminds me of sagebrush or something. They're just our little blue-green plants. So we want to put in one over here, so we're just going to tear off these little pieces, and again work to shape them just a bit with the needle as we're putting them on. So we want them to have kind of straight across bottoms and rounded tops. These look like little shrubby guys. So one in here comes up onto overlapping our rock formation. And we could have a very tiny one right here. And perhaps one more. And then these guys even have a little bit of a highlight, which is the gray color. So baby elephant. Just take some very tiny pieces of baby elephant and give them a little highlight line. Their tops. So just very tiny, some subtle little interest on these guys. Maybe one more little baby elephant highlight. And then we can give the other side one little plant. I might move this from where it was in my original because we're a little bit out of room on this side. But just so this side also has something. And give him a little baby elephant highlight. And then we put one little tiny row of these guys right here in our peach color. So I may even try and do it with the same little piece. And you can do this in multiple pieces or add a little extra here and there to make that little row of plants. Alright, so I think this project is finished. So now we need to take it up off of the mat. So just pull up and off it comes. The back side, you can see all the wool that has come through. Helps to hold it on. So once you have taken it up off the mat, then we put it back on the mat and just take a look at how everything is attached. So now's the time when we need to make sure we've gone all the way to the edges, and pulling it up off the mat kind of shows any spots that need a little more felting if they're looking not quite attached enough at this point. Kind of go back over the piece and just make sure everything is on there as well as we would like. And once that is done, we'll turn over and go ahead and trim. So from the back side, I like to trim so I see exactly where the edge should be, where the pre-felt is. Alright, take a look now. And then if you're going to put it in a frame, now is the time to do that. So get our frame here. And we need to trim down just a bit more. I was not careful enough in the beginning to make sure I was just perfectly the right size. So let me do that, and then we'll flip it over. Okay, so now it's right in the frame. We'll put on our backer board. Slid onto the backer board. Sometimes they get a little stuck, and there we have it. So here it is. I hope you enjoyed making this kit, and I hope you like the way that yours turned out. And if you are in need of any felting supplies or want to check out any of our other kits, I hope you'll visit us at feltedsky.com. So as always, happy felting!